The endocrine system is going to be a series of glands and hormones. This is going to provide a slow response, relatively slow response to a variety of chemical stimuli and situations. As you can see in the image here, the endocrine system is going to be composed of a lot of smaller glands that really are going to be located throughout our body. Now, if we talk about what the endocrine system is actually going to do, it's going to use special chemical messengers, and those are called hormones. And those hormones are going to be used to regulate and control various body activities. They range from basically reproduction, we have growth and development, mobilization of body defenses, so helping us to respond to things, maintenance of electrolyte, water, and nutrient balance of the blood. Last one is it is going to be important for regulation of cellular metabolism and then also energy balance. If we talk about how it's going to work, first of all, we have this variety of different glands that are composed or making up really the endocrine system. And these endocrine glands, their job is to produce hormones. Hormones are chemical substances. They are going to be secreted, and they're going to be secreted into the extracellular fluids. So they are many times entering the blood system, and their job is going to be to regulate the metabolic activities of other cells. So that means cells or tissues that may very possibly be located at quite some distance from the gland that's producing the hormone. Most of the hormones that we do have, they fall into two categories. We have what are called amino acid-based molecules, and then we also have steroids. If we talk about how they're actually going to work and how they're going to function, well, any given hormone is going to affect only specific or certain tissue cells or organs. So there's going to be a very specific matchup between the hormone and the cells or tissues that it's supposed to affect. Now, this comic right here really sums up exactly how this very specific connection is going to be made, or specific communication. The target cells or target organs, they're going to have a very specific receptor, and it's usually a protein receptor, and that receptor is going to specifically match up with the hormone. So if we look at it here, the pink molecule that we see, this is the receptor. And the receptors, they match up very closely like a puzzle type fit or a lock and key type fit with the hormone. So the blue molecule that we see right here, this is the hormone. And hopefully you can see how the shape of the hormone is going to match up very closely with the shape of the receptor. And that is how the cell is going to determine which cells, which organs, what is going to be able to respond to that specific receptor, because it's going to bind to it, and that specific binding is then going to initiate some type of a response to that hormone signal. The effects of binding of the hormone to the receptor, we have several different potential effects, and exactly which effect we get just depends on the specific hormone and target tissue that we're looking at. But just to show you some of them, one of them is going to be that there can be changes in the plasma membrane's permeability or electrical state. Another one is that there can be synthesis of proteins or certain regulatory molecules in the cell. So we may initiate synthesis of different molecules. There can be activation or inactivation of enzymes. Stimulation of mitosis, so stimulating the cell to divide and produce additional cells. And then we can also promote secretory activity. So any one of these could be something that happens with that hormone's binding. There are two mechanisms that hormones can use to trigger cellular activities or cellular changes. And the first one is what we call steroid hormone action. With this one, this steroid, which is the yellow molecule here, the steroid itself is going to enter the cell, and as it enters the cell, it is going to go into the nucleus. So through the cytoplasm into the nucleus, and in the nucleus is where the receptor that's going to specifically match up with that steroid hormone is actually located at. Once we get binding, that specific binding of the steroid to the receptor, that is going to initiate the response, which in this example is actually the binding of the receptor to the DNA. So we can see that happening right here, where we have the receptor binding DNA. And when the receptor binds the DNA, that is going to result in a change in gene expression. That change in gene expression means that from the DNA, we're going to get an mRNA molecule made. And that mRNA molecule is then going to be copied or translated into a protein, which is going to carry out some type of function or activity inside the cell. The second mode of action is non-steroid hormone action. And in this case, we have a receptor that is located on the surface of the cell. When this hormone comes in, it's going to, again, specifically match up with the receptor and that very close fit, so lock and key type fit. And when it does match up and bind to the receptor is going to activate some nearby enzyme. So the pink molecule here is the enzyme, and once this enzyme has been activated, it's going to carry out some type of activity. That activity might be some type of phosphorylation or use of ATP, like we see right here. So in this example, the ATP is going to be used to synthesize or make what we call a secondary messenger or second messenger, which here is cyclic AMP. The cyclic AMP or some other second messenger that might be made is going to have a variety of different cellular effects. In this case, it could cause different molecules to be broken down. So breakdown of glycogen, breakdown of glucose. It might have just the opposite action where it's actually causing the glucose to be converted into glycogen. But in any case, the main difference between these two is that when we're talking about the steroid is going to enter the cell, go through the cytoplasm, into the nucleus, and then this is going to result in a change in gene expression. In the non-steroid hormone action, the hormone is going to bind to a receptor at the surface of the cell, and then this bound receptor is going to activate an enzyme, which is going to set into effect a really chain reaction where we get various cellular responses. So what prompts the release of hormones from the glands? Why do they actually release these hormones? Well, there's different stimuli that can cause this. We have 3 different types of stimuli or categories of stimuli. And the first one is hormonal stimulus. What this means is that there is going to be a gland that actually releases some type of hormone that stimulates yet another gland to produce a hormone. And that's what we see happening in the picture here. We have the hypothalamus, it's secreting hormones. The hypothalamus actually secretes lots of hormones that control other glands. And when this hormone reaches its target gland, it stimulates that to produce hormones itself. This is the most common stimulus that's used to cause glands to produce hormones and secrete hormones. And again, this is when the glands are prodded into action by other hormones that have been secreted by other glands. So basically, a gland is controlling yet another gland. That's the first type of stimuli. The second type of stimuli is what we call humoral stimulus. This is when we have a control by changes in the blood levels of certain ions and nutrients. Calcium is going to be one that's fairly commonly used. So when the concentration of calcium or other ions increases or decreases, that change is going to be sensed by the glands, and that's going to kind of stimulate them into action so that they themselves will begin to produce a hormone, and then that hormone is going to go to some other location inside the body and exert its effects when it does bind its specific receptor. The third type of stimulus is what we call a neural stimulus, and this is going to involve nerves. It's going to involve nerve stimuli, and so we can see an example of that here. We have a specific nerve that is stimulating this gland called the adrenal gland, and this is going to cause that adrenal gland to basically secrete different chemicals, in this case epinephrine and norepinephrine. All right, so if we talk about the different organs of the endocrine system, there are a variety of them. We're not going to talk about every single gland that would be part of the endocrine system, but you can see that these glands are really scattered throughout the body. We have some in the head, the neck, the chest, all the way down into the pelvis region. Every gland has specific hormones that it would be producing, and then again, those hormones, they are secreted. They travel to another location, and they cause their effects when they do bind to those very specific receptors. So let's take a quick look at some of these different glands that we do have in the endocrine system. First, we have the pituitary gland and the hypothalamus. These two are going to be located right there next to each other. And if we focus on the pituitary gland itself is made up of two lobes or two portions. We have the anterior lobe and then also the posterior lobe. Now, the anterior pituitary or the anterior lobe is sometimes called the master endocrine gland. And the reason for this is that it tends to secrete a lot of different hormones, and these are going to control the activities of many endocrine glands. That anterior pituitary itself is going to be controlled by the hypothalamus. Now, if we look at some of the different hormones and glands that the anterior pituitary is controlling, it is the larger one here. So this would be that anterior pituitary. And notice that we've got several different hormones coming out, and then they're affecting several different areas of our body. That's the anterior pituitary. The other one here, the one that's shown in kind of the pink color, is the posterior pituitary. So I'll just label it like that right there. It does also exert its effects on various organs in our body. So if we look at that one just a little bit, it does have effects on other organs, but its primary role is going to be to function as a storage area for hormones that happen to be made by the hypothalamic neurons. If we look towards the bottom, we can see some of the different hormones that are secreted by the posterior pituitary. The ADH, specifically, that hormone has a role in regulating urine production and then also blood pressure. Here's just another look at some of the different hormones that are secreted and produced by the pituitary glands, and then also the different tissues that they are ultimately affecting. Again, the pituitary gland is sometimes called the master endocrine gland because it does control so many other glands inside of our bodies. We can see that the target tissues affect things from bones and muscles to mammary glands, reproductive organs, thyroids, and then we can also see the adrenal cortex there on this slide as well. Now, if we talk a little bit more about the growth hormone is one of those hormones that is produced. It does have its effect on bones and muscles, and so it is very important when we do talk about the overall growth process. So growth hormone, it exerts its major effects on skeletal muscles and long bones. And when we do have abnormalities in the amount of growth hormone, we're going to see big effects on the individual, and we can see disorders such as what we're seeing right here. The growth hormone is going to play a large role in determining the overall body size of the individual. If we have too much, we can end up with a very, very tall individual. If we have too little, we can end up with a very, very small individual. Another important hormone that is produced by the pituitary gland is prolactin. We call this PRL. This is going to target the breast after childbirth, and this particular hormone's job is to stimulate and maintain milk production. So those are a couple specific hormones that are secreted by the pituitary gland. If we talk about another gland that is an important part of the endocrine system, we've got the thyroid gland. And the thyroid gland itself is located at the base of the throat, so right here. It has basically two lobes, and if you just feel in your throat right here, you can kind of feel that thyroid gland, and you may have been to a physician before where they did actually feel the thyroid gland. And so when we're looking at the thyroid gland, this gland is responsible for production of two hormones, specifically thyroid hormone and then also calcitonin. When we're talking about the thyroid hormone, this itself is actually two hormones. We have thyroxine and then also triiodothyronine. And these two hormones together are going to control the rate at which glucose is metabolized. And that specifically means that they are going to control the rate at which glucose is broken down. Now, there can be conditions where the thyroid gland is not active enough, and then we have other conditions where the thyroid is too active. The hypothyroidism, so hypo means low, so this would be if we don't have enough activity. This can result in something like you see right here. This is a goiter where the thyroid gland actually gets very enlarged. And then on the flip side of it, if we have too much activity to the thyroid gland, we get what we call hyperthyroidism. And one of the conditions that can result from this is called Graves' disease. And with Graves' disease, there is an overall bulging of the eyes, such as we see in this image. Now, the thyroids themselves, the list of different characteristics or symptoms that can happen when the thyroid is not working properly really is a long list. Hypothyroidism, again, would be hypo is not enough, so this is a low production of the hormones from the thyroid or the thyroid not working. And you can see that long list there where we have the goiters, we have dry skin, sometimes weight gain, constipation, mood swings. And then we have the flip side where we have hyperthyroidism, which would be a high activity of the thyroid gland, and that has a long list of symptoms as well. So the thyroid gland itself, we've talked about the thyroid hormone. The other hormone, the calcitonin, this has a job in decreasing the blood calcium levels by causing the calcium to be deposited into the bones. So basically it's removing calcium from the blood, depositing that into the bones, so lowering the levels. We get little to no production of the calcitonin in adults, which means that as adults we're not getting that continual addition of the calcium to the bones. And so we do sometimes see that our bones do become more brittle as we age because of that lack of calcium. The parathyroid glands are going to be tiny masses of glandular tissue. These are often found on the posterior surface of the thyroid gland itself, so they're in very close proximity there with the thyroid gland. And what these are going to do is they're going to secrete parathyroid hormone, which is PTH, and this is going to regulate blood calcium ion homeostasis. This hormone is going to act to increase the calcium levels by stimulating the bone breakdown. So while the calcitonin is actually depositing calcium in the bone, this one is doing just the opposite, and it's pulling the calcium back out of the bone when the calcium levels need to be a little bit higher. If we look at this balance right here, the balance is homeostasis. So the two are working together. We've got calcitonin on the top. If we have an increase in the calcium levels in the blood, the calcitonin is going to be produced and secreted, and this production of calcitonin is going to cause calcium from the blood to be then deposited into the bones themselves. And then we can see that if this balance gets tilted so that there is not enough calcium in the blood, so calcium levels decrease, then this is going to stimulate the parathyroid gland to produce the PTH, and PTH is going to cause calcium to be released from the blood. So cause calcium to be released from the bone, so that in that case we will be bringing the blood calcium levels back up. So constant kind of balancing between these two hormones so that we can maintain the calcium levels in the blood exactly where we need them to be. The adrenal glands are going to be two glands that are located in pretty much the center of our body, and they're located very close to the kidneys, or kind of right there on top of the kidneys, really. If we take a closer look at those, here's a closer look at them. You can see that the adrenal sits pretty much right on top of the kidney, and the adrenal itself is going to be composed of two layers. We have the adrenal cortex, which is going to be at the top, and then that is responsible for secreting various hormones, and then underneath that is going to be the adrenal medulla. The adrenal cortex is going to produce hormones that are collectively called corticosteroids. This will include mineralocorticoids, glucocorticoids, and then also sex hormones. If we talk about the mineralocorticoids, they are produced on the outermost layer of the adrenal cortex, so near the top of it in our picture here. They are going to be responsible for regulating mineral or salt content of the blood. They're also going to be targeting the kidney tubules, which are right underneath, and they will target them to selectively reabsorb minerals or allow them to flush out those minerals in the urine. The glucocorticoids, these include cortisone and then also cortisol. These are produced right underneath that top layer. So these are going to be in the glucocorticoid secreting area, so the middle of the adrenal cortex. And these are going to promote normal cell metabolism. This also is going to be used to help resist long-term stressors, and when we resist those long-term stressors, this is one way that we do this is that it's going to increase blood glucose levels. The last item on the list here is that the glucocorticoids, they can reduce pain and inflammation. And that one right there is something that is often used as a drug. We do give people cortisone and cortisol to help reduce pain and inflammation. If we go back to our picture here and we talk a little bit about the bottom one, the adrenal medulla is going to produce hormones that are collectively called catecholamines. These are going to include epinephrine, which is adrenaline, and then also norepinephrine. What these two together are going to do is they are going to regulate what we call the fight or flight response. This is going to be something that increases the heart rate, it increases the blood pressure, and it also increases blood glucose levels. It basically gets the body ready really quickly to either fight or to flight. So basically to run from some type of emergency situation. Here's a look at some of the interactions and effects that we do have of the adrenal glands. So the adrenal is involved in short-term stress responses. Short-term stress responses can do a list of things such as increasing the heart rate, blood pressure, changes in blood flow patterns. So a list there. And again, this is for the fight or flight, getting us primed for emergency situations. And then we also have more prolonged effects, and we can see that on the green side of this. And this is going to be changing things with regard to the sodium in the water in the kidneys, increasing blood volume and blood pressure, and we also have effects on blood sugar as an example. The pancreatic islets, these are going to be scattered among the acinar tissue of the pancreas, and we can see the pancreas down here in the middle of the abdomen. And if we look more closely at these, their job is going to be to produce insulin and also to produce glucagon. So those are the two hormones that the pancreatic islets are going to be producing. If we take a closer look at the pancreatic islets, you can see that they are basically buried here inside of the cells of the pancreas. So we've got a couple little different areas of them. And their job, as we mentioned, is going to be to produce the insulin and then also the glucagon. The glucagon and the insulin, they do work with each other in combination with each other to maintain proper blood glucose levels. So blood glucose homeostasis. And that's what we're seeing in the diagram right here. Basically, if elevated blood sugar levels are detected by the pancreas, then the pancreas will produce insulin. And insulin production is going to result in that glucose being converted into glycogen, which is a polysaccharide. And that's really for storage of that sugar inside of the liver. So that will remove blood sugar. And then if we have too low of blood sugar, that will stimulate glucagon. And glucagon is a hormone that is meant to take glycogen and break it back down into glucose molecules. So the glucagon production will stimulate glucose to be released back into the blood, which is going to raise the blood glucose levels back to where we want them to be. So again, the action of both of these hormones is going to maintain the balance that we see here in front of us. Just another look at the different glands that we do have in the endocrine system. There's a few here that we haven't talked about so far. To point out just a few of the other ones, and this is not an exhaustive list of the glands that are involved, but if we look at the pineal gland, this is going to be located up in the head. This is a small cone-shaped gland, and this gland's job is to secrete melatonin. So a lot of times this is called the sleep hormone. The thymus is located here in the upper chest. This produces a hormone called thymosin. This hormone is essential for development of certain white blood cells and then also for the immune response. And then at the bottom, we have the reproductive glands. And depending on whether we're talking about male or female, we're going to have different reproductive glands there. Their job is going to be production of sex cells. And what we mean by sex cells would be eggs if we're talking about a female in the ovaries, and it would be sperm if we're talking about a male in the testes. And then they're also going to be producing different reproductive hormones. The placenta is another structure that we do want to point out here. It is something that is affected by the hormones that are being produced. This is going to be temporarily formed in the uterus of pregnant women, and its job is going to be to produce protein and then also steroid hormones that will help maintain pregnancy and also prepare for delivery later on when that pregnancy has reached term. Now, human chorionic gonadotrophin, which is HCG, this is produced by the developing embryo, and then later this is produced by the placenta. And this hormone's job is to stimulate the ovaries to continue to produce estrogen and progesterone, and those are going to help with the overall pregnancy process. This hormone is often tested for by pregnancy kits, so they're looking for the presence and levels of HCG. And in later pregnancy, the placenta is going to take over the role of those ovaries of producing the estrogen and the progesterone. So it itself will actually produce those hormones. If we look at what the placenta is actually doing, we can see just a little list of the placenta's roles here. The placenta is going to be secreting hormones itself, but it's only there and it's only secreting these hormones when we have a pregnancy. The placenta is going to secrete estrogens, which ultimately prepare the uterus for the birthing process, so for delivery. It produces progesterone, which helps to maintain proper state of fetal development. It produces this hormone called CS. This is believed to control the mother and fetal metabolism, so help to keep the metabolism levels at the right place. And then chorionic gonadotrophin, this is going to be produced by the fetus, and it tells the body that it is pregnant, and it's going to prevent the interior lining of the uterus from being shed. So we want to maintain that, and the chorionic gonadotrophin is going to do that. And then another one there at the bottom, we have relaxin. Relaxin is thought to work with progesterone for pregnancy maintenance. So just maintaining that state so that we can have a full-term development.